Hi everyone, this is Priscilla Rader. We're going to get started in about 1 minute, but since we'll be using the questions box for Q&A after the presentation, I wanted to give everyone a chance to try it out. So if you want to let me know where you're calling in from, I'd love to see where everyone is from. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and our speaker, Diane Balkin, is in Denver, Colorado. Looking forward to getting started very soon. And that questions box is right on your sidebar. Hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The Link Between Animal Cruelty and Violence Towards Humans. My name is Priscilla Rader. I'm the Education Coordinator for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I'm delighted to have all of you here today to join me on a very, very interesting topic. You know, I hear about the link often in discussions, but I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there or information that doesn't get as much attention as it should be. So we have the fabulous Diane Balkin here today to talk to us about the link, and I am very excited for that. And thank you all for joining us on this Friday. We do have two handouts available on the sidebar. This is a fact sheet on the link, and then we also have Diane's wonderful slides. These slides have a lot of resources, links, and other ways for you to explore this topic after the webinar as well. And like always, we are recording this. So if you wanted to pass along the recording to friends, families, colleagues, everyone on your social media, we're definitely in support of that as well. So we will go ahead and get started. As always, we have a Q&A after the presentation. We'll be ending around 1:30 today. So, but feel free to ask your questions as soon as they pop into your head. No need to wait. You can use that questions box and we'll get to them. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed presenter today. Diane Balkin is Senior Staff Attorney for the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. She began her career as a prosecutor in the Denver District Attorney's Office in 1979, where she worked for the 32 years. When she retired from the DA's office, Diane was the Chief Deputy District Attorney, where she prosecuted all types of felonies and supervised a team of junior lawyers and support staff. Diane also served as the animal crimes prosecutor in her office, where she demonstrated time and again her commitment to ensuring both an effective investigation and an aggressive prosecution of every animal cruelty case within her jurisdiction. And it is my honor to also brag a little bit because just this week, Diane was one of 14 professionals who were appointed to the First Gentleman's Colorado Paw Panel. This is a distinct honor, and I'm so proud of all that she's done for animals and humans alike. This panel will ensure that Colorado animals are protected and considered in decision making. And Colorado also declared May 1st Animal Welfare Day. So I think that's fabulous. I'm sure Diane will love to tell you all a little bit more about that. And we can just go get started on this fabulous topic, and I'm looking forward to it. So get those questions into me, and I will pass it on to Diane.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And it is an honor to be here to do this presentation on behalf of Animal Legal Defense Fund. Yes, I'm very thrilled to have been appointed to that committee by the First Gentleman. This is the first of its kind in Colorado and perhaps even nationwide. We are looking towards a 2 to 3 year commitment with the numerous disciplines represented so we can work collectively to make Colorado the most animal-friendly state in the union and to set leadership goals and to be a role model throughout the country. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with our presentation today. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the link, so it's always a challenge for someone like me to cover it in a way that I hope you find interesting and informative with a number of practical tips and some real-life examples. So we're going to talk today about the link between animal cruelty and violence towards humans. We begin with the notion that pets are part of the family. We see kind of a turn of the century portrait as well as one from today showing that people for centuries have felt that their companion animals are part of the family and we treat them as such. We get the pet ownership statistics from the pet food industry and they analyze them every other year. In 1988, only 56% of the households of the United States owned a pet. And by today, 68% of the households own a pet, which amounts to 84.6 million homes. There are about 90 million owned dogs and 94 million owned cats in the United States. This is important for us to note because nearly every household is going to have one or two pets, and the pets are part of the family and we need to treat them as such and understand the relationship that the humans have with their pet. Gail Melson said in 2001, a child in America today is more likely to grow up with a pet than with a stay-at-home father. This is a stunning comment and once again brings it home to us about how important the role of the pet is, particularly to children in the family setting. I need to go over crimes against animals very briefly with you because we need to understand this in order to better grasp the whole concept of the link. When we think about harm to animals, we need to understand how we define crimes against animals and how they then compare and contrast and show us this connection to crimes against humans. Crimes against animals are just like every other crime. All the constitutional safeguards apply, all of the rules of procedure apply, and the police need to enforce these crimes just like they would any other crime. However, we can make certain distinctions. Number one, investigators, prosecutors, and courts are already under-resourced and overburdened. They often don't get to crimes against animals, or crimes against animals are the lowest rung on the ladder in terms of education, experience, resources, and training. And this is true nationwide. We are, of course, changing this perception bit by bit, day by day, and I've seen marked improvement in how everyone is treating these cases. Number two, crime scenes, often including the body of the animal, are often not documented or processed. So many police departments are under-resourced as it is, and they can't even afford to send detectives to every crime against a human, every assault, every burglary, every car break-in, and you often hear about civilians having to make counter reports rather than see a live policeman. So if you compound that with the fact that animal crimes are lower on the ladder, then we even have the risk that many of these crimes are not investigated at all, or they're investigated by animal control officers who are very well intentioned, who are really coming up to speed in terms of the quality of their investigation, but still often lack the training and experience to conduct investigations. The victim can never tell you what happened. Animal crimes are distinct from other crimes, including crimes with children victims, because animals come in a variety of different species. At least when a human child is harmed, they have the same anatomy and physiology as an adult human, and we cannot say the same for animals. That's why we need veterinarians to assist us through these investigations and prosecutions. These cases also have extremely high social media and mainstream news visibility, which can compromise an investigation and put added burdens on the investigators and prosecutors. Plus, there's often misinformation on the internet about a case or cases. Many people believe that if it's on the internet, it must be true, and that is not necessarily the case. Who are the abusers? It's important for us to note, even though it seems obvious, that anyone can be an abuser regardless of their background, their age, their race, their gender, or any other category you can imagine. we should never presume someone could not be an offender because they fit into a certain class of individuals that you can't imagine would do something like this. The youngest defendant I had when I was a prosecutor was 10 years old, and he took this puppy, which survived. It was a little collie mix, and he was twirling it around by its tail, threw it down to the ground, and was stomping on it, and it was overheard by the neighbor. The neighbor heard the dog crying and called the authorities. And what was interesting about this case, it was also representative of the link, because this young child, he was 10, was in a family situation that was unhealthy. He was under social services had intervened and had been involved with the family for a couple of years. He was off his medication, and he came from a household of domestic violence. And we did, in fact, decide to file charges on him, which were later dismissed, just to get him into the system so that he could get the needed evaluation and treatment. Who are the abused? Any animal. Any animal can be companion, wildlife, farmed, research, entertainment. You have to look to your own state's statutes to determine whether or not there are any carved out exceptions for certain types of behavior or certain types of animals. But most states cover most animals, and they might have separate sections for birds or reptiles or wildlife, but you need to look at your state statute's definition of animal. What constitutes the abuse? It can be anything, from intentional to knowing to reckless to negligent, and it can be from act to omission. Some of the worst cases we have are neglect, which are difficult to prove because you have to prove that the offender failed to do something which resulted in the harm to the animal. The basics of cruelty laws. Most cruelty laws are based in what we call the 5 freedoms, which originated in the United Kingdom in about 1979 with their Farmed Animal Welfare Council. We want to make sure that they are free from hunger and thirst, free from discomfort, free from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, freedom from fear and distress. So if you look at the descriptions of each of these categories, you can see how our cruelty laws are really designed to allow animals to have quality of life in conditions that are conducive to them being free from pain and able to express themselves and to be provided with the basic necessities. In 1992, there were only 7 states that had felony statutes, and those of you involved in the legal profession understand that that is not all that long ago. And what we realized back then in the 90s was, in order to successfully approach and deal with crimes against animals, we had to recognize that there were a class of cases that were so egregious that they warranted a felony classification. So we would gradually see this trend move across the United States. The animal that changed it primarily was Leo, a little Bichon in California. His owner was driving down the highway, was momentarily distracted, and hit the car in front of her. The man got out, reached in, and took Leo and threw him onto oncoming traffic. This was in the year 2000, and he was promptly struck by an automobile and had to be, he died on the way to the veterinarian. And this was one of the first public outcries of someone with a witnessed event, with a witnessed perpetrator, that resulted in the horribly tragic and cruel death of the dog. But it increased awareness nationwide. And as of today, 2019, every state has a felony provision. If you want to see how your state ranks, we have a state's rankings from 1 to 50. The top tier are in green, the middle tier in orange, and the bottom tier in red. You can go to the Animal Legal Defense Fund website and look at the United States animal protection laws and find out where your state is. The other advantage to this is it is based on an objective criteria with many factors, and you can see model laws or states with better laws if you want to engage in changes within your jurisdiction to make your animal protection better. We're going to now talk about the link. It is really impossible to talk about this topic, or really any topic related to animal cruelty, without talking about stories where animals were harmed or killed. And I've made every effort to minimize this during the presentation. And take care of yourself. If something is too distressing, feel free to look away. When I lecture on this topic, I always stress the fact that this is a matter of public safety and human welfare, not just about animal welfare. The link I see is threefold. Number one, the link between cruelty to animals and domestic violence. Number two, the link between a human and an animal, also known as the human-animal bond. Number three, the link among the agencies and individuals concerned about the safety of the community and fair and equal justice for everybody involved. We'll talk later about, cross-reporting, etc., and the need for agencies to share information with each other. The human-animal bond, and this is from the American Veterinary Medical Association, is a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals that is influenced by behaviors essential to the health and well-being of both. This includes emotional, psychological, and physical interaction of people, animals, and the environment. Veterinarians often refer to this as One Health: humans, animals, and the environment. We know that people look to their pets for support, comfort, and security. They positively impact physical health and reduce stress. They provide greater life satisfaction, and they help us cope better with loss and grief. So when you take this concept of the human-animal bond and you put it to work, you realize the value that pets play in the family. You also realize the significance of what happens when a pet is harmed or killed in a household that has domestic violence at its core, and the profound impact it has on the survivors. When we think about the link, we're going to take a look back in time to some woodcuts made over 250 years ago by William Hogarth called The Four Stages of Cruelty. Remember, these were made in 1750. The first stage of cruelty depicts harm to animals by children in the schoolyard, with these just various acts of harm to animals. And you can see several of them. You can see them hanging the cats upside down, using fire and poking a bird. And the character throughout these four woodcuts is Thomas Nero. He's the one with the little hat on his head, and he is putting the poker down the dog's anus while another child is trying to stop him. And this will become important later when I talk to you about a case I actually handled. There's also tying the bone on the dog's tail, the dog eating the cat, cockfighting, an animal falling from the roof, etc. So it's random acts of violence by children in the schoolyard as the first woodcut. We move from the schoolyard and from small animals to the second stage of cruelty, where our offender in the foreground is beating the horse, and you can see that the horse already has a broken leg. There's a man beating a sheep, and there's pillaging going on in the background, a child getting run over by a wagon wheel. So we've moved from the schoolyard to the streets. We've moved from small animals to large animals and to property crimes. The third woodcut is cruelty and perfection, where our offender, who is he's the bald one being held back by the citizens, has murdered his pregnant girlfriend. And the artist, William Hogarth, was so tuned in to kind of the psychology of crime that he even included defensive wounds on the pregnant girlfriend's wrist. The fourth woodcut is the reward of cruelty. We've gone full circle. Thomas Nero has been publicly executed, and he's being publicly dissected, and in a bit of poetic justice, we see the dog eating his entrails. So back in the day, we had Henry Bergh, who was a New York philanthropist. He created the ASPCA in 1866. What's important about this is that animal welfare predates child welfare in our country by about 9 years. And that all changed because of Mary Ellen Wilson, who you see a photograph of. You can see she was beaten. She was what we would call a failure to thrive, a child that was neglected. And there was no one to investigate it when people heard her cries in the apartment building. So Henry Bergh sent animal welfare officers to look into it, and she was saved, and we have the birth of child welfare. I see the awareness of the link as being significant threefold. One, crime prevention. If we recognize and intervene with a child, a young adult, or even an adult abusing an animal, we might be able to stop other crimes from occurring. And we used to believe that a person that harmed an animal would go on to harm humans, but we know now that there is a correlation between them. It does not mean that one leads to the other, but they are closely related. So a person that will do bad things to an animal will do bad things to a human. It helps us break the cycle of family violence. Many survivors and pet owners will not leave for fear of what will happen to their pet. And it helps us with dangerousness and risk assessment. It helps us know by an act of animal cruelty how dangerous a person may or may not be. Let's take a quick look at the dangerousness and risk assessment. It can be found on the website of the Colorado Link Project, and there is a link to that later in the presentation if you want to learn more about these criteria. There are about 33 criteria, and if you look at it, it makes perfect sense, and it also helps us evaluate the dangerousness of a person who has been caused harm to a human. A high victim vulnerability, 2 or more victims, more than one instance, injury results in death, multiple injuries, restraint, victim was bound, the use of fire. These are all logical characteristic or classes of crimes that for everyone you see represented in an incident should elevate your concern about the potential risk that this person poses to the public. And here are the last of the 33. Excuse me. What we know now is that animal abusers are 5 times more likely than non-animal abusers to commit violent crimes. They're 4 times more likely to commit property crimes and 3 times more likely to have drug or disorderly conduct offenses. What this means is that if you have someone in your neighborhood or precinct or county who's engaged in animal cruelty, the odds are that that person is involved in other types of criminal conduct. When we looked at the link back in the 80s and 90s, we really concentrated on serial killers, and we thought about this graduation theory. They graduate from killing an animal to killing a human, when in fact we know now there's a correlation, not necessarily one leading to the other. And there are numerous serial killers who have a documented history of animal cruelty. We also looked at the link at the schoolyard shooters, and still today, over half of them have engaged in some type of confirmed animal cruelty in their past.
A teenage boy went on a shooting spree at a high school in Pearl, Mississippi. The killer's former girlfriend, Christina, and another girl, Lydia, lay dead in the school hall, and 7 other students were wounded before 16-year-old Luke Woodham was overpowered. And then they found that Luke had also killed his own mother at their home. Luke Woodham had killed 5 months before, but the victim wasn't the first. What he described in his diary was the killing of his pet dog.
We know, too, as recently as February 2018, Nicholas Cruz, the one who engaged in the school shooting in Florida, had a documented history of animal cruelty. And it just reaffirms for us that these crimes need to be taken seriously, that law enforcement can no longer say, boys will be boys, or it's just a dog or just a cat. There are certain inherent dangers of merely witnessing cruelty or being exposed to cruelty, because the person exposed to it becomes desensitized to violence, and that becomes the norm. Youth who witness violence between family members or witness harm to animals are 3 times more likely to abuse animals. Individuals who witness cruelty were over 8 times more likely to be perpetrators. It's the biggest predictor of later violence by witnesses. 62 to 76% of animal cruelty in the home occurs in front of children. We know how disastrous this is, and later I will talk about considering making it a sentence enhancer for a person to harm or kill an animal in the presence of a child. Children exposed to domestic violence are nearly 3 times more likely to exhibit cruelty towards animals than children who have no history of witnessing domestic violence. Sexually abused children were 5 times more likely to abuse animals than were children who were not sexually abused. 60% of individuals who witnessed or perpetrated animal abuse also experienced family violence. So what we see from all these statistics and studies is that domestic violence and animal cruelty and child abuse go hand in glove. And it is difficult to imagine situations where one might exist and the other does not, and we have to be cognizant of this and be aware that violence is violence is violence. We also know, just as an aside, that there are many more dog bites in households where there is domestic violence than in households where there is not. When we look at this cycle, we see the batterer harm or threaten the animal, the survivors stay, the children are exposed to the domestic violence and the animal abuse, and they grow up to be violent, and this becomes a never-ending cycle. We're going to take a quick look at the case of Samson. This was a case I handled. The juvenile was 17 years old, and he killed his pet dog, Samson, and it was a clear indicator at the time that he had suffered serious abuse himself. He took Samson, who was a chow mix, in the middle of the night. He beat him to death with a hammer. He beat his skull in with a hammer. He then carried the dog and posed the dog a half a block away for other people to see and put a sign up on the street. And he then put a tree branch up the dog's anus. So we have a sexual component. We have him planning this by making a cross and putting up the sign. He killed his own dog. And so when we did investigate, we determined that he was indeed, had been the victim at age 4 of multiple male relatives sexually assaulting him. And this young man had been institutionalized and medicated for years and was absolutely profoundly mentally ill, and he had demons inside him because of the previous abuse that were really too much for him to handle. We also looked at this case in terms of the dangerousness assessment criteria to demonstrate how profound the problem was with this young man. So remember the Hogarth print, and you think it'll never happen, and then you turn around and you have the case right in your own neighborhood. So here's a picture of Samson with the tree branches and the sign and the cross. And you can see the length he went to by stripping the tree branch of all the branches. And the sexual component, and look at the dangerousness. He killed the animal. He had a relationship with it. He staged it. He wanted people to find out about it. There's the sexual component and so forth. And here was the sign, a work of the next king. It's pure art. And we were glad we intervened. He also had a history of fire setting, and his mother just didn't want him to stay on medication because she said she didn't make him take his meds because he didn't like the way it made him feel, so she felt she couldn't force him to do it. And when evaluated, the psychiatrist found that he was at great risk of both homicidal tendencies and suicide. The link to youth violence. The median age for the onset of hurting animals is 6.5 years old, earlier than bullying, vandalism, and setting fires. So when we talk about crime prevention, think about how important it is for us to have a zero tolerance for cruelty to animals and to educate our school and other resource officers to keep their eyes open for harm to animals. One of the best documents, and you can download it from the internet, is Animal Abuse and Youth Violence. Even though it's from 2001, it's got some timeless information in it about youth that commit animal abuse. When we think about animal cruelty, we often think of Jeffrey Dahmer as the poster child, but as you can see in these photographs, he also had his own pet dog, Frisky, so it's not uncommon for an offender to have a pet animal yet still abuse animals on the side. And Margaret Mead, anthropologist, said one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a child is to kill or torture an animal and get away with it. Once again, cementing in our minds this need for a zero tolerance for cruelty. Keith Jesperson kind of epitomizes the concept of the serial killer with a prior history of animal cruelty. He was a cross-country truck driver who often killed prostitutes along the way and left a happy face sign.
Serial killer, born in Prague, Don't let your children turn out like me. It all unfolded here in the shadow of the Oregon State Prison. A group of local high school students beat this cat to death, only to have their football coach defend them in the local paper. Let's put this in perspective, he said. It's a foolish act that cost a dumb animal his life. Letters of outrage poured in, and most outraged of all was this one, from another animal abuse, an inmate at the prison, Keith Jesperson. The shock, you see, is that Keith Jesperson is not just an animal abuser. He's also someone you might consider the worst of the worst, a serial murderer known as the happy-faced killer. Why do you kill people? Because it's easy. It gave me a thrill. You jump straight into it, and it's like it's nothing. I mean, they become nothing to me. They become inanimate objects. Jesperson was known for taunting authorities with letters emblazoned with smiling faces. His letter about the cat, about his own animal abuse, was deadly serious. All this did, he says, was spawn in me the urge to kill again. An animal was harder to lure towards myself. A human being is an easy creature to kill. How many animals do you figure you killed as a kid? Oh, 50, 60. Take a stray cat, staple it to its paws to a plank, and sit back and throw knives at it. Gophers, dogs, cats. Jesperson says he tortured and killed them all. Behavior which he says made his later crimes much easier. Tell me about the progression in thinking. From killing an animal to killing a person. There's really no difference. Not in my eyes, there's no difference between killing a human being and killing an animal. I've already built myself into that state of mind where killing was just killing.
And just take a look at how tall he is. He was just gigantic. The good news is that recognizing this link has caused the birth of a number of national link efforts, each with very valuable information and resources. Probably the best all around is the National Link Coalition, and it is a fabulous resource. And part of that is a link to bibliography, which I'll show you in a moment. But one of the advantages to this particular website is it has an interactive map. So if you want to report cruelty, you can push, click on your state and then further go by county or town. And Phil Arco, the one who manages the web page and website, has information for every agency that will undertake an investigation into animal cruelty. And they have a bunch of articles, and they have a national link letter you can sign up for free, that it is distributed worldwide every month with every new legislative development and every key case that has link implications and so forth. Part of that you can access is the bibliography, which has over 800 articles about the link listed by different disciplines. So if you are a prosecutor, you can look at articles related to prosecution, elder abuse, family violence, etc. The Colorado Link Project is also a very valuable tool. The National Coalition on Violence Against Animals, NCOVA, the National Law Enforcement Center on Animal Abuse. What's really important about this is for many years, the weak link was perceived to be law enforcement, and they are really stepping up to the plate and coming into the fold and recognizing the importance of paying attention to crimes with animals. There's a wonderful fact sheet, which is part of your handout today at the ALDF website on the link. And what really was a major development was the FBI starting to collect data on crimes involving animals. NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and although it is voluntary and not all jurisdictions belong, we are starting to now catalog information nationwide about crimes involving animals. They are realizing how important it is for them in terms of profiling and just combating crime as a whole. The types of animal cruelty, it's in 4 different types: simple and gross neglect, intentional abuse and torture, organized abuse, and animal sexual abuse. So when law enforcement or animal control categorizes a given case, it goes into one of these 4 categories.
Right, the FBI says that it will now start tracking animal cruelty cases nationwide starting in January. Local law enforcement agencies are going to have to report those statistics to the FBI. And the FBI actually has 4 categories they're going to put these into. including neglect, intentional abuse, like torture, organized abuse like dog and cockfighting, and animal sexual abuse. In many law enforcement circles, animal cruelty signals a precursor to future violent crime like murder and sex assault, and it is also linked to domestic violence.
There's a wonderful user's manual available online if you want to know more about the categories and the different criteria. What's significant is the fact that the FBI has recognized the seriousness. The National Sheriff Association just recently put out an entire publication on animal cruelty as a gateway crime. We are also looking towards addressing violence as violence is violence, and we are approaching the Center for Disease Control to have them understand that violence towards animal is a form of violence and often shares the same causes as other forms of violence. And in order to better prevent violence and make our communities safer, we have to be aware of violence against any living creature. And we also are looking towards the National Violent Death Reporting System to see look at the factors behind violent deaths and see what role, if at all, animal cruelty plays in this, to make sure we as a society are going full circle in understanding this entire concept of violence and death that can be prevented. The link in domestic violence. We first had the battered child syndrome written by Henry Kemp in 1962, Lenore Walker, the battered woman syndrome in 1979, and then two veterinarians recognized the battered pet syndrome. They started recognizing that certain pet animals were coming in with old and healed injuries, indicating that it may not be the first and only time that an animal has been subject to abuse or neglect. We're starting to realize that pets and animals should not be the forgotten victim in domestic violence scenarios. What is the context of the link? What is the link in the context of family violence? What we know is that when animals are abused, people are at risk, and when people are abused, animals are at risk. These are inextricably interwoven. We can't remove one from the other. And later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk about the fifth circle, which is gaining more traction as we understand more about the link. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control. It's prevalent in every community, affects all people, regardless of their background, and it's often physical, accompanied by emotionally abusive and controlling behavior. It can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and death. In the United States, an average of 20 people experience intimate partner physical violence every minute. It is an epidemic, and we certainly know more now than we knew years ago, but we need to stay on top of it to help prevent this violence from reoccurring and from training children that that's the way life is. What does the research tell us? A significant percentage of domestic violence survivors reported their partner killed, harmed, or threatened an animal. 32% reported their children hurt or killed an animal. Think about how startling that is. Why is the child harming the animal? Well, we know now being in the environment of violence or witnessing violence can lead to it. 75% of incidents of animal abuse occurred in the presence of children. Batterers who also abuse pets are more dangerous than batterers who do not. They use more controlling behaviors and more forms of violence, such as sexual assault, emotional violence, and stalking. When we look back at the Baltimore domestic violence awareness poster from 1997, you see a woman and a child huddled in the corner, and we also know that this should not be gender specific. It can be any gender committing these crimes and any gender as a victim. And you can see just 1 year later, they realized the importance of morphing in a dog to show that pets are part of this concept of violence.
What did you say happened to a dog?
This was a wonderful campaign by the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office called Spot Abuse, and notice it also profiles a veterinarian. We are bringing them into the fold on every level with animal cruelty. The veterinarian's role is significant. The AVMA recognizes the importance for veterinarians to report animal cruelty. This is also shared by other national organizations such as AHA, the American Animal Hospital Associations. And if you want to know what the law is in your state, go to the AVMA website and you click on your state to see what the reporting rules are within your state. If you want a good model legislation, the Colorado model, which was enacted in 2007, makes it mandatory for a veterinarian to report animal cruelty and animal fighting. It is mandatory, it is not permissive. It also gives the veterinarian both civil and criminal immunity for reporting in good faith, and their good faith is presumed. And the veterinary patient-client privilege cannot be asserted for the purpose of excluding or refusing evidence or testimony. What's important about the Colorado provision is, number one, it makes it mandatory. Number two, it gives the veterinarian both civil and criminal immunity, and the same cannot be said throughout the nation. Some statutes make it permissive to report. Some statutes grant certain types of immunity. And in one state, in particular, Kentucky, it is against the law for a veterinarian to report their client for animal cruelty without the client's consent. The other thing that's important about Colorado, and I didn't include it, but we also have a separate section that makes it mandatory for the veterinary clinician to turn over their veterinary records to law enforcement without a subpoena or search warrant to further an investigation of animal cruelty. I'm going to talk about a few domestic violence case examples. We're going to first talk about a recanting victim. Those of you with experience in the field, this should come as no surprise to you. We know that a number of victims of domestic violence recant because of the close relationship with the defendant. They fear more and greater violence to themselves or others. There's external pressure, financial dependence. I can't leave him because he's my sole form of support. The defendant acts remorseful and apologetic, so we have this cycle of violence with the abuse, the loving contrition, the apologies, and then it starts all over again. And what's really compelling is that many victims feel guilty and they believe that they brought it on themselves. It's a very complicated issue that we need to recognize and help victims through this, because often it is through no fault of their own that they recant and they take it back. And the following, Erica, you will see a videotape of her taken at the time where she sees her boyfriend actually kill her Chihuahua puppy. And the good news is in Colorado, the police carry cameras and they under a directive to videotape all victims of domestic violence at the time and at the scene. And at this time, we capture the truth of the matter. And later when they recant, we can use the videotape to impeach them. And the jury can see how compelling it is. So here's a little snippet of her statement. And you can see she was horribly beaten up too. And she was on drugs and drunk at the time as well.
And you started cutting me like psycho. And you grabbed Stuart by his neck and started shaking him. And I told him, what are you doing? And he goes, Stuart, I seen him. And I told him, that's where you're doing the wrong thing. I don't give a fuck, I'm clean sick.
Did you say choke the dog?
Yeah, he killed a dog. He killed Stuart. I went up and Stuart like on the floor.
And here's a picture of Erica, and next is a picture of poor little Stuart. But the good news is we had this all documented and memorialized at the time. Animal cruelty and child abuse. This was another case of mine where Spike, this Basenji, who was probably 12 or 13, was shot in the face with a BB rifle in front of a 6-year-old. The father had given the 6-year-old the BB rifle for a present. He was probably sick of the dog because the dog was becoming incontinent, probably deaf and blind. So he shot the dog in the face and then shooed it off. It was located later and taken to the Denver Animal Shelter. So I filed child abuse charges and animal cruelty charges. And I remember the policeman saying, does this mean every time domestic violence occurs in the presence of a child, we should charge child abuse? And I said, absolutely. And we were able to do so because of the actual definition in Colorado allowed it. And Spike is really important as well because look at him, his poor coat condition, he's thin, And once he was seen by a doctor, a veterinarian, and a dentist, he was later adopted and went on to live another 2.5 years, and that is the very same dog. So it says volumes about how a dog, the body language of a dog can also tell you that things are not well. And the importance of cross-reporting and paying attention. If child welfare goes to this house, they should pay attention to the pets. And if animal control goes, they should pay attention to spouses and children and elders. We have certain pattern injuries that appear in domestic violence situations and other situations on both children and pets. What about obesity? There was a case where a person was convicted of obesity in Canada for allowing the cat Napoleon to gain so much weight. What about failing to seek veterinary or medical care or doing things against medical advice? We see it in animals and children. And what about neglect? Animal cruelty and elder abuse. Elders are attached to their pets for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's a connection to the past and an incentive for the future. It gives them kind of a reason to live. How many times have you heard, I live for my cat. If I didn't have Sammy, I don't know what I would do. It facilitates social interaction, provides comfort and stress relief, definitely contributes to better health. It's a stimulus for exercise. You have to walk it or you have to feed it and clean up after it. It's a connection to reality, and it provides love, humor, attention, and protection. So there's a variety of reasons why it is healthy and helpful for a senior to have a pet. There are growing trends now. We call them seniors for seniors, senior pets for senior humans. And there's a host of websites that provide a pairing of senior humans with shelter senior animals. Animals and elder abuse. The animal can be threatened, tortured, killed, or denied care. They may be used as an instrument for power and control or used as tools for financial exploitation. If you don't give me another $500, I'm going to hurt Fluffy. The perpetrators may be selfish, retaliatory, or based on frustration of caregiving. And when we think about the latter, we just have to be mindful of those in a caregiving role that it might be taking its toll on them, and be aware of how humans and animals are faring in that household. In Colorado, we have mandatory reports of abuse and exploitation of at-risk elders. This went into effect in 2014. So clearly, someone abusing an animal or threatening to abuse an animal or exploiting the pet ownership with an elder would be should be reporting this to the authorities. I just put into the search engine today elder abuse and animal cruelty, and it came up with thousands of entries of people that are arrested for both elder abuse and animal cruelty, and it's usually that the humans are living in horrible conditions. Animal hoarding and elder abuse. Often the hoarder has an elder person or a child or other dependent adult. This is a hoarding situation where you see the floor is brown, but it is just full of feces. The reason why the globes around the light bulbs are dark is that's fly excrement, and you can see the poor situation the cats and dogs are in. And at this particular household, the woman lived with her 78-year-old mother who was confined to a wheelchair. Hoarding is now recognized as a distinct mental disorder as of 2013. It doesn't specifically say animal hoarding, but it comes under that general category. Hoarding can be any species. And why is it a concern? It affects tens of thousands of animals each year, subjecting many to prolonged pain and suffering, causes more injury, suffering, and death to animals than intentional violent acts of animal abuse, frequently endangers the health, safety, and life of the hoarder as well as children and dependent adults. This is why it's a key to the link. We don't think about hoarding being a link situation, but quite often it is. Results in damage or destruction of properties. Animal control law enforcement response to this case interferes with their ability to respond to other animal and human needs. And think about the resources that have to be dedicated to a hoarding situation and the effect it can have on the neighborhood. Similar acts and transactions. We have a provision in criminal law called similar acts and transactions where you can use evidence of similar transactions even if it's uncharged conduct, if it shows certain similarities and it helps the jury or the judge resolve whether or not the alleged perpetrator acted with the required intent, or was this a pattern of abuse, or was this a lack of an accident. So we had a really interesting case in Denver in partnership with a case in another neighboring county that evidences this similar transaction. Taz, a cat, was brought in with a cigarette burn to a Denver veterinarian, and the owner said that it was his girlfriend's son who was up from Pueblo, Colorado for the weekend. So we did some searching and we found the more information about the son on the internet. So they memorialized the injuries to Taz, the cat, and this shows the importance of demonstrative evidence as well when you're talking about injuries. We know it was a cat, and I want to know where on the body is this injury. We found out then that his girlfriend's son had a case pending in Pueblo, Colorado. It's about an hour and a half outside of Denver. It was a domestic violence case for burning his girlfriend with a cigarette. So although neither jurisdiction could prosecute both cases, we could each use it in our respective cases to show that it was a similar transaction and this was not an accident, and it evidenced the intent on behalf of the perpetrator. And like many cases, the victim returned to him, and then there was a subsequent domestic violence case later where you can see the healed scar. Once again, memorializing the fact that many victims remain with the perpetrator, even after they've been physically or emotionally injured. So here are some statutory provisions that help address the link to domestic violence, and I include these as a source of information for you. If your local laws are not as good, these are a great place to start without reinventing the wheel. Number one, Colorado enhanced its definition of domestic violence to include crimes against animals when it's used as a method of coercion, control, punishment, intimidation, or revenge directed against a person with whom the actor is or has been involved in an intimate relationship. So we recognize the fact that threatening or harming or killing an animal in the context of domestic violence comes under the definition of domestic violence, which kicks in other protections and safeguards for victims in our state. In Colorado, these are state law requirements of peace officers. They must arrest a suspect if there's probable cause to believe they committed an act of domestic violence. That then would include an act against an animal if committed in that context. Now, this is not universally embraced. There are some individuals that feel that mandatory arrest is not a good way to address domestic violence, that it puts the victim in greater harm. But others argue that it is a good mechanism to use so that there at least allows a cooling off period where the alleged victim is in a safer place to make a more considered decisions. They must make effort to collect and preserve evidence. That means photographs and collecting the animal as evidence and putting it into a safer place. They must note in the document that it's act of domestic violence. They must use every reasonable means to enforce protection orders and must arrest a suspect who's violated a protection order. So if we have harm to an animal committed in the context of domestic violence, all of these protections and requirements kick in. Pets in protection orders. There's a growing trend in favor of this throughout the country as well. The animal itself is protected. Violation could result in the filing of additional criminal charges and could result in the revocation of bond if a case is pending. In Colorado, we have both a criminal protection order and we also have civil protection orders. Think about how this could happen in a divorce situation or a probate situation or custody situation where we need to protect the animal as well as the humans. So in Colorado, look at even this is fairly recent as well, it got expanded to include an order prohibiting the taking, transferring, concealing, harming, disposing of, or threatening to harm an animal owned, possessed, leased, kept, or held by a victim or witness. And notice that we included witness in these protection orders. So if somebody's witness to a crime and they have a pet, we can get a protection order for their pet as well as the victim's pet. And here's our provision for civil protection orders. There are certain states that have enhanced penalties and sentencing options for crimes against animals committed in the presence of children, or for crimes against animals committed in the context of domestic violence. There are also ownership or possession bans for individuals convicted of a crime against an animal, and mandatory or permissive offense-specific evaluation and treatment for people convicted of a crime against an animal. And these are kind of trending. Colorado, we literally just Monday, the governor signed a bill enacting a law allowing the court to issue an ownership ban for somebody convicted of a misdemeanor and a mandatory ban for somebody convicted of a felony unless an expert in the field of mental health field said that it wouldn't be necessary or warranted. We've learned that in a number of these cases it's really important to save the animal, to put them in a safe place, and to keep the perpetrator away from possessing or being in the presence of animals. That's also another way to get them the help they need without incarcerating them and yet still protect animals. What's really important in this is community-based sheltering for human and animal victims. We know that it's really tough for them to leave the situation, so we need to facilitate it by giving them a place to go where they can take their animals. There's a number of great websites that exist for domestic violence pet support. There's the Safety Program from Allie Phillips. There's Safe Havens, which was one of the originals by Frank Ascione and Red Rover, and the Animal Welfare Institute I didn't list. But there are a host of websites that domestic violence victims can go to and find out where there are shelters in their neighborhood. Also, veterinarians as a whole, and I know I can speak in Colorado, will also provide housing for human victims, not human victims, but for the animal victims of domestic violence. And we've made great headway in creating these facilities. Some are brick and mortar, some are just a converted garage, some are crates and cages, and it depends on the venue, how much money they have, and there are grant monies available to build these shelters. The best way to break the cycle of violence is to help the victims get away and extricate themselves from the offender. And one of the greatest impediments is a fear of leaving the pet behind. So the more we know about breaking the cycle of violence, the more we need to provide these safe havens for the victims to take their pets. When we look at, I told you earlier about the 4 circles where we have domestic violence, elders, animal abuse, and child abuse. I think we cannot ignore the connection or the link, if you will, or the correlation to other criminal activity by people who abuse animals. For example, in animal fighting cases, which, as you know, is one of the recognized criteria for the NIBRS FBI program as organized crime, we often will see animal cruelty and neglect, firearms and restricted weapons, drugs, gambling, money laundering, endangering the welfare of minors, organized crime, RICO, and conspiracy. I've seen videotapes of cockfighting in rural Colorado where they have the children as young as, 10, collecting the money on the bets and the betting. And if you have ever seen a video of a dog fight or cockfight, it is brutal. It's very difficult and painful to watch. So we often see these confiscated firearms, controlled substances and marijuana, and illegal proceeds. And the good news is that most states have spectator laws making it against the law to even attend an animal fight. The theory is if you didn't have people attending it and betting on it, it would not thrive. There are also other crimes that could be associated with animal sexual abuse, animal cruelty, neglect, child abuse, pornography and crush videos, and other forms of paraphilia. If someone is willing to have sex with something that has claws and fur and teeth, what would prevent them from engaging in some other type of forced sexual encounter with another vulnerable type victim? The other thing we need to bear in mind that sometimes animal cruelty doesn't occur in a vacuum, and there's other crimes during that same incident, like burglary, theft, arson. They could set the animal on fire, etc. Cross-reporting and cross-training. It's really important that we try to promote this concept of interdisciplinary and interagency reporting and information sharing geared towards ensuring comprehensive and appropriate responses to link-related public safety and welfare issues. When we start thinking about the overlap of animal cruelty with issues of human violence, we understand that there's a greater likelihood of cases having cross-disciplinary implications. Think about a single household and how different agencies might be called to that household, whether it's child welfare, adult protective services, animal control. We have neighborhood services in the case of hoarding, and nobody shares information yet. More than one agency is responding to the same household, and it would be helpful to exchange information and pay attention. It's really important to try to coordinate the responses among all the agencies. The other thing we are learning is that the importance at intake for these various agencies, welfare agencies, is if you're conducting an intake for child welfare, ask if there are, other adults under the roof at risk or elders, or if there's domestic violence. Ask if there's pets. How are the pets well? Are they safe? Have they been harmed or killed? In animal control, ask if there's any other form of violence. Ask how the children are doing. If there's, are they safe? Are there any issues? Look for neglect. So we need these intake forms to be updated to cross over into other disciplines for the purpose of sharing information and making a safer community. In every household or other crime scene where a sentient being was harmed or neglected, is there a possibility that there are multiple victims or other crimes? So just pay attention, keep your eyes open, and ask questions. How do you best handle animal crimes? Well, I always say that there's no cookie-cutter approach to any crime. And when we're going to evaluate how you handle allegations or an investigation into a crime involving an animal, we're going to look at a variety of factors. These are probably the most key factors, although it's by no means an exhaustive list. I'm going to look at the perpetrator, the defendant, and say, what is his or her criminal history? Do they have prior felony convictions or convictions for crimes of violence or crimes against animals? And has there been a previous contact or previous abuse of animals? I want to know about the victim. What was the victim? Was it a vulnerable victim, whether it's human or animal? Was it young or old or aging or sick or a puppy or confined? Is there any way it could have defended itself, or was it totally vulnerable? I also want to know the facts of the case. Was there a deadly weapon? Was there serious injury? Was there torture or fire, or was there a sex offense? Did the person memorialize? And what was the relationship between the defendant and the victim? And how reliable are my facts? And society as a whole, how are we going to look at this crime in terms of the best approach to overall community safety, public safety, taking all this into consideration? What is the most fair and just resolution of it for everyone involved? Some options are, of course, humane education for the low-level offenses or the low-level neglect. It's just like some people need parenting classes, some people need pet parenting classes. Diversion, if you get into the court system, what happens to the animals and who pays for their care while a case is pending? We say, who feeds the evidence? What if it's a large-scale case? What if, we didn't get to talk about it, but don't underestimate the importance of large animals and the role they play as pets and significant to victims in this case. Farmed animals, sometimes a horse or a pig. This isn't just simply dogs and cats. How do we get them to surrender the animals? Who takes care of them? How are they transported? Let's talk about the evaluation of the offender. What kind of a community do you come from? Do you have clinicians that are just competent overall? You don't necessarily need to have offense-specific experience. There are a number of assessment tools available. Many of them are listed on the Colorado Link Project website. What about treatment? We do know for a fact that hoarders, the recidivism rate is upwards of almost reaching 100%. So is treatment going to help them? Restitution, ownership possession bans. and ultimately incarceration. Do some people just need to be sentenced to some form of incarceration to protect themselves, not protect themselves, but to protect humans and animals, and also to serve as part of a punitive element for the act that they commit? We should also consider whether or not the crime was committed in the context of domestic violence or committed in the presence of a child, and urge possession bans and evaluations and treatment. And I will end on a light note, prescription cat, and then would entertain any questions.
I found a way to relieve my depression.
I found a way to lower my cholesterol.
I found a way to strengthen my immune system.
I found better health with cat.
In clinical studies, prescription strength cat has been shown to be effective in strengthening your immune system, preventing allergies in children, lowering cholesterol and triglyceride levels, reducing stress, and decreasing anxiety and depression. Side effects may include difficulty breathing because the cat is sleeping on your face, trouble working because the cat is on the computer, issues packing because the cat is on your suitcase. You may experience trouble peeing because your cat is staring at you. You may spend all day posting pictures of your cat on social media. Some cat owners experience nausea at the sight of dead rodents on their doorstep, and walking cat surface isn't great because your cat knocks it off and doesn't get a kitty litter, and may feel a strange sensation that you don't own your cat, but the cat actually owns you. Discover better health. Ask your veterinarian about cats.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was incredible, as always. We do have quite a few questions, and keep them coming. I will get the show on the road. So Renata is asking, do you ever get a chance to learn about follow-up on animal victims and or abusers for the cases that you've covered or have been part of?
The answer is yes, quite often, particularly if animals are surrendered or relinquished at the outset. Usually we are able to be made very well aware about whether or not they were adopted out. The goal is to have every animal be adopted and rehomed that has been the victim of abuse or cruelty. The only exception would be those that have such behavior problems that they are unsafe, but I would say 99% of animals are tried to be rehabilitated and rehomed, and then we leave it to the adopters and leave them alone and don't necessarily follow it. In terms of the accused, obviously if there's a criminal case, I'm going to know what happens because I'm going to be there from the outset of knowing what happened, how I disposed of the case, and I'm going to be present at sentencing, and I'm probably going to be present at review hearings. We actually know the most about juvenile offenders because when a disposition is entered into with a juvenile, we have far more psychological information. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, and I must add that district attorneys are probably in a more enviable position than some city or county attorneys where the volume is so high and they don't have the resources to really know a lot about the offender. So whether or not a crime is charged on a city level or a state level may make all the difference in the world.
Thank you. Let's see. Christina asks, do you feel that statewide animal abuse registries would not only help red flag and provide mandatory anger management, evaluations, group therapy, etc., but could also help each state more conveniently provide information to the FBI and neighbors?
First of all, let me try to answer it in pieces that are appropriate. Number one, only law enforcement has the authority to fill out documentation for NIBRS and the FBI. They have to have a contractual agreement with them, and it's software that only law enforcement can access. So therein is also one of the problems with reporting cruelties because animal control, unless they are affiliated with the sheriff's office, don't even have the authority to input into NIBRS. Number two, evaluation and treatment can be a condition of probation without regard to anything that has to do with animal abuse or registry. So it could be a standalone condition that can be followed up on by the probation department and the courts. Number three, registries. Registries are not necessarily universally embraced. Some people feel that it puts too much of a stigma on the offender. Some people say it simply doesn't work. And the goal of a registry really Well, we think it is because we want to know if someone that's harmed or killed an animal is living next to us, but that isn't necessarily going to work because a lot of the sex offender registries don't work well. But what you want to do is have kind of a database of the do not adopt to these people. So hopefully in jurisdictions they share information. The other problem with the only registries I know about now are local. Most of them are based in New York. And by the way, my New York colleagues love having registries and love having it mandatory that the person has to register. So it's just not universally accepted or rejected. There's still the jury's out, if you will. But I would say a vast multitude of people currently are not in favor of registries because they don't seem to do the trick.
Thank you. So Renata is also asking about training for police officers. Could you talk a little bit about the criminal justice program and how officers are starting to be more trained on how to recognize animal abuse with child abuse, or the link, and how this has kind of shifted in the last few years?
Sure. One of the reasons I love what I do with criminal justice program is that we offer free training nationwide to any law enforcement agency, animal control, sheriff, police, veterinarians, prosecutors, shelters, rescue. We travel throughout the country and we do training on the recognition and investigation and prosecution of animal crimes. We actually call it kind of like from the crime scene to the courtroom and beyond, to help the audience understand literally how do we go about the best way to investigate and prosecute a crime. And we teach them the best practices if we can. And hopefully when we go to a venue, we ask the organizers to make it multidisciplinary so that it can also serve as a forum where the attendees can exchange information and rely on each other locally. So the prosecutors can meet the veterinarians, and the veterinarians can meet law enforcement, and law enforcement can partner with animal control. There's also a trend towards making the investigation and prosecution of animal crimes part of the greater package of post-certification for law enforcement officers as a whole. So we're trending towards getting more and better training. And we also, just as an aside, we do specific training on search warrants and animal fighting and hoarding. We have, topic specific. And this is, by the way, at no cost to the agencies. We just need to make sure that we get the maximum kind of attendance that we can, as centralized as we can, to get the best outcome for them locally.
Great. Yeah, the criminal justice program is so clever in the way that they're working with law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, judges. You can go to aldf.org and check out all the incredible work that they're doing. Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, let me also just add one thing. Yeah. We engaged in a recent partnership with the NCJ-FCJ, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and it's one of the best partnerships we've cultivated. So we are bringing the judges into the fold, and it's been kind of a missing piece, but a goal of ours for quite some time. So we're really excited at this.
So Greg is asking, we all realize expanded and more inclusive statutes are required for many reasons, including our enforcement and prosecution purposes. In states like Colorado, where more progressive laws exist, are we seeing more convictions and or more meaningful sentencing in these animal abuse neglect cases?
It's difficult to measure, Greg, because we really it's really difficult to embrace how many cruelty cases there are throughout the country, because it is woefully underreported just as a class of crimes. And what's really sad is that animals can meet their demise like by being hit by a car or being attacked by a predator, and their bodies are just thrown into the dumpster the same way an abuse victim cat could be thrown in a dumpster. So we don't really have good accurate statistics about conviction rates. And one thing I am sorry to say in Colorado is that our maximum possible penalty for felony is woefully inadequate. So we can't measure it necessarily by numbers of convictions or duration of sentences, but I can tell you without a doubt it has generated more interest, more cases are being filed nationwide.
Awesome. So quite a few people are actually wondering, at least in your experiences, what type of either injuries to animals were most common and what type of psychological findings were most common to see on perpetrators? And this could just be from your own anecdotal experience.
Right. It's really hard for me to say because I lack expertise. When a case like the young man that killed the dog Samson, when it first surfaced, we knew immediately that whoever did this had some psychological and mental health problems. And then when we realized it, it just percolated to the top as he was quite sick and quite dangerous. There are some studies done. I know Randy Lockwood has great expertise on this in terms of the type of crime and injury inflicted says something about the perpetrator. It's not unlike a crime against a human. How many times do we say that victim was stabbed 92 times? It's personal. So if an animal is stabbed multiple times, it's personal. If a human is choked to death, strangled to death, that's really personal, and that it takes a lot of strength and quite a bit of time. So if an animal is strangled, I mean, I think we can draw parallels to humans, and what we do see is in my experience, some of the worst tortures and mutilations have been in the context of domestic violence in an attempt to cause compliance by the human victim. We see, the torture and mutilation.
Thank you. So Melissa asked an interesting question. Are there any agencies or programs that you know of that work proactively to anticipate and mitigate animal cruelty and domestic abuse behaviors before it happens, rather than trying to deal with it after the fact?
The best thing that I know about that we are working towards is the concept of humane education, where we try to get into the schools early and we teach children the importance of being kind to all living creatures and why, and the responsibilities of pet ownership and taking care of humans. But it's hard to say what you might recognize. I think it's important for parents and teachers and police and social workers to just simply pay attention and keep their eyes open, and also to not go overboard, because there's a certain amount, let's say, of experimentation maybe that a child's going to engage in that you don't want to go overboard thinking that they're going to be, engage in assaultive behavior because they, teased a spider.
Thank you. And let's see. Chelsea is asking, you've talked about the importance of animal abuse as a part of the crime prevention, especially where children commit animal crimes that can draw attention to the need for early intervention. But do we know whether that early intervention works? So, for example, the case of Samson, do we know whether that boy went on to commit further crimes against animals or humans? And can you reverse the process of becoming a serial killer, or is it more a matter of surveillance and removing opportunities to commit those crimes? Let me know if you want me to repeat that.
That's right. I think early intervention is the key. I can tell you in the case about Samson, there was early intervention because he was 17 at the time and he had been sexually assaulted at 4, and there was a history of him being institutionalized. The problem with his situation was he lived at home with his mother, his sister, infant niece and nephew, I mean small children, and the mother's current boyfriend who had been in and out of jail. So it was really a difficult situation for the child to be living in. And the best we could do for him was intervene when we did, and he was actually put into residential care for many, many years. And the young boy, the 10-year-old that assaulted the collie puppy, I actually found him on Facebook about a month ago, and it was a picture of him with an assault rifle and another picture of him with a pet. So he clearly survived. I don't know their criminal histories. I just think it's a pay attention, and it's We need to give resources to families that may not recognize the severity of it or the importance of them following, getting the help they need. It's almost like you need intervention by adult protective services as well. The young boy with the collie puppy, he had been under social services care for 2 years, was off his meds, and he answered the door when the police came with a toy gun saying to the police, give me back my friggin' puppy. So a lot of it is environmental, and we need, actually you bring up a great point. What we need to do is educate the public too about the awareness and have parents understand the importance, because no parent's going to want to embrace the concept that their child is harming animals and that their child could harm humans.
Wonderful, thank you. Kathy is asking, so I support the ALDF and a large adoption and care organization. After listening to you, I feel it's more important to support the legal protection of animals. Would appreciate your opinion. And thank you for your support, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love what we do. What's important to me is I'm not getting any younger. I'm not sure I wish I would. I've been so blessed to have 2 great careers as a prosecutor and now an advocate for animals. And what our goal is to pass the baton and train others to go out and train more and train more and train more. And we have seen, we are reaping the rewards of this, and Priscilla can attest to this. Our organization has grown substantially, and our followers have grown, and they've become more active, and they've learned a lot more. So thank you for your support. We are going to continue to grow, and we are going to make it so that others can carry on. And hopefully animal cruelty will be thought of in the same context now that we think of domestic violence. I remember first hearing domestic violence and we didn't embrace it the way we do now, and hopefully it'll be a household term in a decade or so.
I hope so too, and I think that we're on the right trajectory for it. Even in the last 5-10 years, I've seen such an increase in awareness and in the way that people are caring about these issues. And we really do support our law students quite a lot at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. So if you are a law student and you're interested in animal law, please feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email address in the chat box, but it's just prater@aldf.org. I'd love to talk to you all about ways to get involved and everything. So thank you, Diane. We have time for a couple more questions. Diane, are you ready? I have a longer one for you.
Sure.
Okay. Dean is asking, thank you so much for your work. I'm curious about the relevance of the link to violence against animals and humans in animal agriculture. One 2009 study found increased violent crime rates in communities with slaughterhouses. In your opinion, does slaughterhouse work, which is today's highly industrialized, also increase human violence? And if so, might this present opportunities to reduce the scale of animal agriculture, where much of the violence against animals occur?
There are studies in this area that support the concept that those exposed to working in slaughterhouses absolutely are dramatically affected in their personal lives. And I don't know what the statistics or the studies show in terms of how they're able to measure it, just by its very nature to be put into the slaughterhouse floor where you are repeatedly confronted with the taking of a life of a sentient creature cannot, in the long run, bode well for a person. And I often wonder myself if they provide support for people for just the PTSD that would be the fallout. I also worry about, those that compose the ones that are actually working on the slaughterhouse floor in terms of their socioeconomic or their immigration status, and how are we treating them? And ALDF is committed to investigating and pursuing the atrocities in factory farms. And it's a slow-go process, but we are not unmindful of it.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. I don't know the statistics either off the top of my head, but about the effects of slaughterhouse work on people, especially people of color, immigration, and low socioeconomic class. I know that in addition to the Animal Legal Defense Fund's own work on that on our website, Food Empowerment Project also has a lot of information about workers and how possibly the link could be used at least to better educate and have the public understand that this isn't happening in a vacuum, that these people are also being abused by the employers just as the animals are being abused. So great
Right.
question. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because often like Diane mentioned in her presentation, dogs and cats are considered for the link, but it really does go far beyond just the animals that we're sharing our houses with. So a few more questions. Let's see. Actually, I think I've gotten through all of them. So Diane, did you have any last words that you would like to
Thank
impart
you.
upon our attendees?
So thank you so much for attending. It means a lot to me and to our organization, and get the word out and attend all the webinars. They are extremely informative, and most importantly, have a wonderful weekend. And go hug your pets.
Yes, go hug those animals and give them love from us. And thank you so much for joining. The recorded link will be sent out momentarily, so you can pass it along. I did get a question from a law professor whether he can share this webinar with his students. Feel free. We do these purely for educational reasons, and so the more people who listen and watch and get informed, the better. Also, after this webinar, a survey will pop up. Please take the survey, as this helps us really improve these webinars and gives us topic ideas and all that good stuff. So thank you so much to Diane Balkin for taking the time to really dive deep into the link and how it's affecting the animal protection movement and other social justice issues. And just thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you all.
Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time. And just stay tuned. We'll have our animal law summer school dates on factory farming announced really soon. So I hope that all of you will be joining us for the animal law summer schools happening June, July, and August. And we'll be releasing that information very, very soon. So a little sneak peek for you, but it's on factory farming. Very excited. Thank you again, Diane, and we will see you all later.